Sorry, Bev. I remembered to turn the mic on for myself. Anyway, it wasn't for you. Anyhow, I want to start off the message for this morning by asking you to think about the things that stress you out. Now, we're not going to end on your stress, okay? We're only starting with those things that stress you out here. So, your stress, where does that come from? I see some of you nodding out there. And some things in life are just nuisances. They're small things. But really, if you take enough of those small things and add them up, it becomes a lot. But when it comes to small things, I mean, something maybe like clutter. Some people cannot stand clutter. My wife cannot stand clutter. Me, if you've ever seen my office, either maybe downtown or any place else, you know I don't mind clutter whatsoever. I live very well in clutter. Now, on my computer, everything is very well organized, but on my desk was certainly not. Now, okay, other things in life are heavier than that, maybe even chaotic. You know, the death of a loved one, obviously, that is high stress. Being a caregiver, raising grandchildren, raising your own kids. I mean, that's stressful. How about conflict? Boy, that's a high stress thing. Stress in your family, conflict in your family, maybe even conflict internally. I mean, that can be very stressful. Health issues, moving, depression, anxiety, a pandemic. I mean, we're kind of nice to be through that, but I think in many ways we are still living with residual effect of the pandemic. Even joyful things can be highly stressful. Weddings come to mind. I mean, I've done many weddings over the years, and I can remember times where, as the pastor, I had to be the calming presence in the midst of some situations, you know. So yeah, stress really, it is just a natural part of life. And stress, some of it can be okay. It can even be good for you, you know. I mean, some stress, it gives you or makes you be creative, and some people do their best work under stress. And those stress levels, it's good for you. That can vary from person to person. But it's also true that sometimes it is just simply too much. You know, it's too stressful. And then you throw in the news, you throw in politics and everything in the big picture, and it just feels like chaos. And you end up in survival mode. And you know what survival mode is? I mean, you're just trying to get through the day, get through the week, do what you have to. I'm just surviving. And then life, it just feels like it's spinning out of control. There is no order. There's no rhythm. There's no reason for anything. And that's what chaos is. And for some people, I think chaos is just normal. That's how life is for them. And this feeling of chaos is very common in the scriptures. We see a lot of that in the scriptures. And so this morning, we're going to look at that theme in the scriptures that we have seen, and we're going to see what God does with chaos. And so the first scripture that you heard was out of Genesis. I'm going to reread part of that, and it says, "In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep," which is a reference to water, "while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters." Now, it is important to understand that in the ancient Hebrew culture, water, particularly large bodies of water, were considered to be an image for chaos. And water, that could be a dangerous place. Now, that can, you look at, the sea, the ocean, a flood, that could become a very dangerous place very quickly. And they lived, by the sea, and they understood how that could become a very dangerous place. And before I go any further, I want to mention to you to be thinking about other places in the Bible where large bodies of water was an important part of the story. So think about that. But something else I'll say about water is some of you know this already, but not this past summer, but the summer before, Shannon and I went whitewater rafting for the first time in our lives. And I will tell you that in whitewater rafting, that can become pretty chaotic very quickly, okay? Barring one experience with that, it was great, okay? Now, that one experience kind of spoiled it in many ways. I would do it again. In fact, I want to do it again, but if I'm going to, I got to find somebody else to go with me, okay? Shannon's not doing it. But I will assure you, whitewater rafting, that can get pretty crazy really quick. All right. So anyway, let's look back to our scriptures here. Genesis 1. I mean, really, that is describing a chaotic situation here. I'm going to reread part of that, and it says, so the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. Again, that kind of references water. While a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. And so you got this image here, really, of chaos, of the waters here. But what does God do with that chaos? Think about that. What's he doing in Genesis 1? God is creating something. God is creating something new. God is bringing life out of that chaos. And more than that, God is bringing order. God is bringing order to that chaotic situation. Now, many of you may remember other stories in the Bible having to do with water. I don't know. Anybody want to take any shots? Anybody think of any stories where water was key?
Part of the Red Sea.
Part of the Red Sea. I heard Moses. Yes, yeah. I was waiting for that one. Now, actually, Moses has another story. I'm just kind of coming to mind. I mean, when he was put in the basket, put on the river. I thought maybe that's what somebody was referring to over there. I don't know. Any others where water was? Jonah. You bet I didn't think of that one. Yeah. Okay. Very chaotic for Jonah. Okay, definitely dangerous, bad situation. So we see, that theme a lot through the scriptures. In the second scripture that we heard right before this message was another good example. I mean, Jesus is with the disciples in a boat out on the Sea of Galilee. The storm blows up was a common thing. I mean, people understood this, and they thought they were all going to die. Jesus asleep, and Jesus, though, he gets up and he calms the storm. And, that you got to realize, that is the same voice that spoke in Genesis 1. When Jesus calms that storm, it's the same voice that spoke creation in Genesis 1. And so in the gospel lesson, what did Jesus create in that situation? Well, I think he created faith in the disciples. Now, the disciples, they had a lot of work to do. They had a lot of growing to do in the area of faith. But Jesus is building faith in them, and he brought order to their chaos. And so in Scripture, we consistently see where God is creating new things out of chaos. I mean, think of Moses, okay? The Red Sea. God created a new nation out of that. And so God is bringing new life. God brings order out of the chaos. Now, when the waters are crashing around you in the midst of a storm, that can be hard to trust. That's a difficult situation. I'll give one other illustration to our whitewater rafting experience. We got dumped, okay? And I tell you, when you come up out of that, you come to the surface, it's not over yet because, man, the water was rough. And you try to catch a breath in the midst of that. It's not an easy thing to do. And sometimes, in life, it feels that way. And it's hard to trust in the midst of those times. And we might ask in those times, why? Why is this happening? And we covered this some last week. And so we know that there are going to be times in life where things happen that you're not going to know why on this side of life. When you get to heaven, you can ask Jesus why if it still matters to you, and you'll get an answer. Sometimes bad things happen because people make mistakes. Sometimes, evil things happen because people are just simply evil. They do evil things. And speaking of evil, I will say that Satan does his best work in the midst of chaos. Satan is always seeking to create chaos. That's kind of pointing to our next sermon series. I will get to that. It might be a couple of weeks, but that is coming. Now, another question I want to throw out here is this, though. Do you suppose that God ever creates chaos for the very purpose of creating something new? I would say, yeah, I think God does that sometimes. Jesus himself was that kind of chaos. For the religious leaders, Jesus, he was turning their apple cart over. That was a chaotic thing for them. Jesus was bringing a new thing. Another example that I will quickly give is that the first Christians, right after Pentecost, they were very happy to stay right in Jerusalem. That's where everything started. Because Christians, like most people, we have an inclination to just kind of settle. We seek comfort. We want to keep things all the same. And again, they would have stayed right there in Jerusalem. But what happened is that persecution came to them from the Jewish leaders, and they fled that chaotic situation. And then they took the gospel out to Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. So God used that. You could even say that God sent it to get them out, to take the gospel out to other places. And so if God sends a chaotic situation, we've got to remember that it is always for our good. God is trying to build something new in you, and that's part of the point that we covered last week. So, kind of get back to this week's message here. So if God, though, is bringing new life and order to chaos, the question is, how do we get that power into our lives? How do we get God's creative ordering power into our lives? Well, there's lots of ways that we could do that. But there's one thing that we see in our scriptures today that I want to point out, and that is that we see God speaking. In the creation, God said, "Let there be light." God said, "Let the land produce vegetation." God said, "Let the land produce living creatures." God is speaking life into that situation. Jesus spoke and he calmed the storm. He said, "Quiet, be still." And then the winds died down. And so the key for us then is to let God speak into the midst of our chaotic situations. So that gives another question. Well, how do we get that? How do we get God's voice speaking into us? And I will say, God is always ready to speak more than we're ready to listen. We're not always good listeners. I'm bad about that myself. And there's lots of ways for us to hear. We can talk about prayer. We can talk about being in Scripture, worship and music, accountability, and so forth. But I'm going to mention one thing that is connected to our Scriptures for this morning. We haven't read this part yet, but I'm going back to the creation here. And at the end of the creation in the Bible, it says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all of his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating he had done." Now, the topic of Sabbath needs more than half a sermon, okay? That's what I got left here for this morning. That needs its own series, and like I've mentioned, I'm working on another series, so I don't know. This will probably get maybe another week at least before I jump into that other series, but we see here, God stopped. God rested. Man, there's an idea. We live in a 24/7 world. You can buy anything anytime. If Myers or Walmart isn't open, you can go on the Amazon and buy anything anytime you want. You can work anytime you want. You can bank anytime you want. You can go to school anytime you want. I mean, there is really no place for pause. There's no place for stopping. You can go all the time. And some people really have a hard time stopping. And I am one of those people. I do not do stopping very well. Shannon will tell you, and I think Shannon might have been pointing to me when I was saying that back then. But anyway, there's so many examples I could give, but I can tell you, I am one of these people that's got the knee thing going here all the time. If we're at a ball game, you're sitting in the bleachers, Shannon's like, honey, you are shaking the entire stadium. That's just me, and it'll work for maybe 10 seconds, and I'm back to doing that. But yeah, I don't sit still very well, and when it comes to people not being able to stop, the reasons for that can vary. Maybe they're full of nervous energy. I don't know, but on other things, maybe they're seriously just trying to make ends meet. Maybe they are running from pain. Maybe they find all their value in their work, and so they just keep going. So many reasons that there could be, but those reasons, that not stopping, it leads to chaos. At least it's part of the reason for chaos. And it's a big reason why we just don't have time for God, or we don't take the time that we should. Again, hence, that brings the chaos into our lives because we're not taking time for God. Long-term stress, you probably know, that is a bad thing for you. Long-term stress, if you've got that will cause your body to create all kinds of chemicals. One of those chemicals being cortisol. If you know anything about cortisol, you know that is practically, how do you say it? Oh, shoot. Prednisone. I had to think about how to pronounce that. Prednisone. That is a very powerful drug. And if you've been on prednisone or know people that have been on prednisone, it does good things for a while, but man, you do not want to be on that long term. That's bad stuff. That'll raise your blood pressure, among other things. And I will tell you, I had my health screening not that long ago, and my blood pressure was higher than it ever was. And I thought, I guess it kind of makes sense in a way. Long-term stress. This is not a good thing for us. Now, God is not against work, okay? God, I think, made us to do things. God made us to accomplish things. And so listen to something else that God says. This is in Exodus. So this kind of relates to the whole Red Sea thing. But God says to the Israelites, this is after they've come out of Egypt. He says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. So 6 days. God says work 6 days. That's not a light schedule. So rather than 24/7, maybe 16/6, or 17/6, maybe that would be a good schedule. And then have a day that is set apart, set aside for the Lord. And that's what holy is, by the way. If something is holy, it is set apart for the Lord. And holy, or set apart, and have that time for Sabbath, it's more than rest. Now, rest can be part of it. So I don't know, maybe this afternoon some of you are taking a nap. I don't know, maybe you normally do. But I won't. But anyway, but I think it's more than just rest. I think on that Sabbath, or when we see that God rested, I think that God did more than simply rest. I think that God just sat back and enjoyed the creation. God sat back and soaked it in, relished it. And God just kind of sat back and just like, it's like, man, this is so good. Remember, God said everything is good. Do we ever do that? Do we ever do anything that is somewhat like that, where we sit back and just enjoy and relish it and take in all that is good. And thank God. I mean, give thanks to God and sit back and enjoy and relish it. Time with family. Or are we more inclined to just go, 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 do, entertain, and just more stuff? I'm afraid, at least culturally, I mean, the culture tends to do more of the latter as opposed to really sit back and relish and enjoy. I want us to help us, take this further. I want us to think about the word remember here. So back to that scripture, remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy. Remembering is more than recalling. And here's what I mean by that. Let's think of the opposite of remembering, which is dismembering. Now, that's not a pleasant thought, is it? Dismembering something. I mean, that's tearing apart. That's destruction. We recently just completed a series on the book of Daniel, and we looked a lot at King Nebuchadnezzar. And then do you remember the threat, Nebuchadnezzar's favorite threat that he would give to people? If you don't do what I tell you to do, you're going to be cut to pieces and your house will be reduced to rubble. I mean, King Nebuchadnezzar, he was really into that. We kind of laughed about it. He really likes this kind of thing. So that's chaos. I mean, and that's what chaos creates. Dismembering, that is what 24/7 will do to us. That is what a lack of Sabbath will do to us. It tears us apart. It separates us from God. It brings chaos into our lives. It brings diseases of the mind, body, and soul. Now, remembering, okay? Let's think of remember, okay, now as the opposite of that. It is pulling back together. It's reconnecting, reuniting, restoring. It's putting the pieces back together. Remembering puts us back together with God, puts us back together with others and with our best self. This is what happens when we remember the Sabbath. When we remember one day that is scheduled, that we keep, where we look back and give thanks, and we recognize God as the giver. And then we also look ahead to the week ahead, and it sets the tone for the week ahead. And so, in the spirit of Sabbath, what can you do to remember Sabbath? Keeping a day, I think, is important, but maybe also remembering to have Sabbath throughout the week where we remember, where we pull everything back together again. In the spirit of Sabbath, I'll close on this thought. I was planning on taking Labor Day weekend off. Remember what I said about my blood pressure? I was saying, okay, I need to take a little bit of time off here. And so I was planning all this family stuff, and we had a family gathering yesterday, had a birthday party. And at the birthday party, I already figured out that Lydia's working that whole Labor Day weekend. And then Hannah's like, oh, wait a minute, Dad. I got a wedding on Saturday that I have to go to. So I'm like, okay, well, there goes all of my Labor Day weekend plans. I don't know what's happening next weekend, by the way. I might be here, I might not. So anyway, but again, the question, what can you do to have some time where you take Sabbath, where you remember, bring the pieces back together again? We'll continue this discussion, our sermon discussion, after the service. You've got plenty of things to think about for that. So we're going to close with our last hymn for this morning. This is My Father's World. I'm going to invite you to stand. The words will be on the screen, or you can follow in your hymnal if you wish.